We have a full set of activities this morning in the keynote. And because this is the last day, we thought we'd take a slightly different tact. So we have a little bit of security, a topic on security. We have a little bit of existing industry. And then we have a panel talking about the future of IoT. And again, a broad topic, but we have assembled a really interesting team from companies that are over 100 years old using IoT to transform themselves and also very young companies. So when I heard that the first speaker today was going to be from the FBI, I immediately, 100 things went through my mind. And I was like, who's speaking? What are they going to speak about? And if you're from the Bay Area, then there have been all these discussions happening all over the place of this dialogue, and you read about it. But there hasn't been a deeper, direct, engaged dialogue. So then I met Arlette 2 nights ago, and I realized she's just one of us. So she's the Chief Information Security Officer for the FBI, and she's responsible for securing the FBI assets. And she also has a very deep interest in everything IoT. And I promised I won't steal her thunder. But there's a lot of existing, what is now called IoT embedded infrastructure that has been there for a very long time. And all the old embedded people know this. So for me, it is also really important, and really we're appreciative of Arlette coming down and speaking to us, and proactively, so that we can engage in this dialogue versus it being things that we read in the news. So with that, it's my great honor and privilege to introduce Arlette Hart, who is the Chief Information Security Officer for the FBI. Please welcome Arlette.
Thank you so much for having me here today. I think we FBI, we government as a whole, are always interested in engaging with especially the forward-thinking people in technology, because it just is how we have to work here. And you have to work here, and making sure that we're all on the same page and we're all driving in the same direction is critically important. As Param said, I am in charge of defending the infrastructure for the FBI and making sure that the data and the capabilities are secure in a way that enables mission. So it is not anybody's job to secure data unto itself, right? The job of a CISO is to make sure the mission is accomplished with the right level of security. And that's what I do. That also means as new technology comes into play, we are looking at that and making sure that we use that in ways that are appropriate to the technology and appropriate to the level of security that we require for accomplishing our mission. So it's a complicated piece, though. Over here in Silicon Valley, you kind of have a lot of people who are all on the same level and all speaking words. The people where I'm from, which is in Beaver Falls, Pennsylvania, they don't speak that language. I don't know if you're aware of the idea of the graying of America, but the average age in Beaver Falls, and I don't live there anymore, so I'm not contributing to this one way or the other, but it is over 60. So there's an entire middle of the country that is in that age range, as opposed to in the age of the people on the parentheses of the country. And this makes a difference in the IoT world, because there are pieces that are getting left behind. And the question is, so what is it that's being done with IoT? And what is it that's not being done with IoT? So you have a poverty level within the industry. So red lights and libraries and things like that that are getting enabled in this area are not necessarily getting enabled in places that have a much lower income level. Students, teachers, all these things, governments, churches, hospitals, all these capabilities that have margins that are like razor thin sometimes, can't necessarily do the investment. And what are the implications of that for the IoT world as a whole? We talked about being able to have connectivity. In San Francisco, yeah, they can do a lot of connectivity. In a small town in the middle of the Midwest, it gets a lot harder. So what's the implications there? One of the other pieces that's important is data used to be physical. You had a watch, you had a camera, you had a compass, you had your payphone, you had your address book, you had your yellow pages. And each one of those was a thing that you went and you looked at, and you looked things up in that. And it was slow, and it was painful, and you had to know the information ahead of time. And all of those things have moved to devices now. And IoT is enabling that, and then also you're controlling things remotely from those devices. And this is important because some of those things that you're remotely controlling are medical devices, implanted. You all know this stuff, right? And when you think in terms of IoT, my perception is that when people talk in terms of IoT, they think in terms of like 1 or 2 or 5, but the realm of it is very, very wide, and so the end user isn't thinking in the same terms as you are. We're not thinking connected city connects your house to your medical pacemaker, to your watch, to your clothes, to your water supply thing. People in general are thinking in terms of 1 or 2 things, and they're not really connecting all those together. And it makes for a little bit of a culture clash from the haves versus the have-nots. We're also mixing business and personal in a way that we never did before. Used to be, you'd go to work, you'd do your work at work. Okay, a long time ago, but occasionally you'd do email at home, but then that was really it. And then you didn't have your online presence. Your online presence now is mixing with your work presence, so you have this continuum. So what is it that you are versus what is it that the organization is? Those are questions that, like, the lines get really blurry with the IoT and the apps and the whole continuum of technology that reaches across every part of the world. In organizations, data that you assumed to be under control is not necessarily in your control anymore. So hyperconnectivity requires hypertrust. I trust that the electricity is being done directly in a way that meets my requirements. 3 pieces of that are important. You have to have the right sensor at the right level so that it is accurately doing things. It is sending the right signal, and the validity of the signal is accurate. So is it on, is it off? Those 3 pieces you can't do without any of those 3. Those are all elements of trust, and they're all disconnected from you. And these are pieces that, when you look from a security perspective, it's like, how do I validate that? And how do I translate that into an infrastructure that I own at this point? One of the pieces that people always talk about is, well, I'm going to assume that risk. That's a risk that I'm just going to say, yeah, that's one I just have to assume. And there's right, but make sure that you know what that means. Because just assuming a risk does not mean that that thing is not going to happen. It means that you say, okay, yeah, if that happens, I understand, and I understand the implications. Honestly, that's a hard thing to do. Also, understanding where you're transferring risk. This is a piece that you're like, okay, somebody somewhere is doing a thing, but you got multiple levels down. So you've got the supply chain question, like not only what's the supply chain for, the capability that you've deployed, but also how many levels out is your supply chain going beyond what you actually understand at this moment. This takes us to one of those unintended consequences pieces. And I think this is a piece that's really important in IoT world. It's like you develop a thing in order to accomplish a specific task, and all of a sudden that thing is not doing that thing, it's doing something completely different. 1998, the Furby. Cute little fuzzy thing sits on the desk or wherever and records everything that's going on. They brought it into secure environments, and all of a sudden it's like, wait, cute little fuzzy thing sitting on a desk recording everything that's going on. It's not supposed to be recording everything that's going on. We don't allow that. They actually had signs. They were like banned from NSA and other secure locations. It's like, what, a toy? Unintended consequences. You get your hoverboards. They explode, catching your house on fire. Unintended consequences. Okay, it's a battery issue. It's not specifically IoT, except that the battery itself, they had one this morning, right? I don't know how many of you saw the news this morning. Now they're pulling shoes for kids off of the shelves because their batteries exploded, the little light-up shoes. It's like, really? And this is not an indictment of any of these organizations, by the way. I'm not trying to point fingers at any of them. They're trying to do things that are enabling business or enabling their users in ways that really drive this message home. Your TV is watching you. It's like you're watching your TV is watching you. It's not a great thing. You don't necessarily want to do that. or your drones, or the chat thing from Microsoft where it's like, Tay aimed at 18 to 24-year-old boys and said, oh, they can chat with this, IM. Like, took it offline in 24 hours because that IM and the boys who were chatting with it are, yeah, no. So let's toss cybersecurity onto this. The role of cybersecurity is to understand and control your environment. Let's toss IoT onto cybersecurity. This is beyond herding cats. Herding cats is way, way long ago in cybersecurity world, right? I mean, this is like, okay, understand your perimeter, understand the authorization, understand your software, get your continuous validation, make sure you're monitoring things. And then you pull all of these IoT capabilities into the mix, and you don't know what a boundary looks like, much less how to defend it. And it's true. So it's got some implications that are driving your capabilities. So when you do that, you end up with saying, okay, well, what is the pros and cons of this? From the pro side, IoT has two sides of the story. It's absolutely safer and more secure. It enables security in a way that we've never imagined before. You can be in a place and people know where you are and whether you should be there and things like that. Your refrigerator can tell you if your eggs are old. Your car can tell you that it needs, any number of more capabilities than it used to. You used to get an oil light, that was it. Now your tires are low. You need to, everything in the world can be told to you by your car. Your suppliers can also tell you, okay, well, I'm just automatically shipping you this thing because I know you're running low on it because, and once we get to the place where we're putting IPv6 in here, every single pencil can have its own IP address and it's, reaches this level and it says, okay, now we got the pencils are, diminished, and not that anyone uses pencils, but you know what I mean. And they have a picture of your enterprise. These are the kinds of things that your enterprise does. These are the kinds of things your enterprise never does. And when you aggregate the data, you get a big data picture and you get the, okay, well, this is normal and this is abnormal. How you drive through that piece of it. Your shopping habits, your preferences, you already have this, You just walk in a store and it says, oh, by the way, if you turn left, you're going to find your favorite pair of shoes. I'm a girl. I look for shoes. I'm just saying. But what is the price of this convenience and the security? Well, the price is that you're giving up a lot of information about yourself to other organizations that you don't know. I think maybe there's more than two sides to this story. I added privacy and regulation, and I'm going to add a third one also. So the privacy question is, what is it that you, as a person, are giving and keeping in this model? As an organization, what are you giving and keeping? As cities and countries and things like that, what is it that we have, and what is the data that's being collected? What are those EULAs, end user license agreement? What are you signing when you just click that box? Who's ever read one of those? I've read a couple of them, but my eyes glaze. But are they really collecting information they need to be collecting? And what are they doing? And are they safeguarding that information? And is it being protected in ways that are of your interest? One of the other pieces is there's regulations. Every country, every city, every state, everybody has regulations that they're imposing because they're sensing that there's something going on here that needs a little more attention than it's getting at this moment. Frankly, the open source world, I completely applaud open source. I completely applaud sharing and all of these things that are able to put light in places that are currently not as bright as they should be. I'm going to add one more to this slide, and I'm going to talk about resilience, because I think that's sort of the promise of IoT and also the challenge. So in the resilience front, you have your alt route, and you have things going to places where they couldn't go, and make sure that you have alternative validated routes to get confirmed activity, especially in things like SCADA systems and critical infrastructure capabilities. When we talk in terms of resilience, though, again, you need to have validated and confirmed. But the other question, and with cars and all these other things, is when does the human need to come back in the loop? And I don't know how many of you were here around 1999, and all of a sudden it was like, oh wait, Y2K, nobody could put a 20 instead of a 19 in front of the date, or and so they only had 2-digit date things. All kinds of COBOL programmers came out of the woods and were like busily putting the dates back into the right format. We didn't have a lot of COBOL programmers at that point. And right now, it's like we're talking about IoT as driving the ability to automate things that were currently manual or previously manual. So people that were twisting wheels in order to open dam levers, now that's all being done automatically. We have to retain some level, or I'm not saying we have to, I'm saying we need to understand where we need to still be able to maintain the physical controls. And when something goes really wrong, how are we going to have a physical control override a logical control? And do we have the people, do we have the processes, do we have the ability and awareness to be able to do that when we need to? From the FBI perspective, I look at this as a kind of things go wrong in unexpected ways. Back to the battery exploding. Nobody's looking at a hoverboard and saying, well, that's primarily a fire issue. That's a transportation issue. Unexpected consequences leads to the other side of it, and we have to be aware of how to do the unexpected. With new technology, things really are different, and it starts with, and it still is, although it's starting to modify a little bit, the fact that we're driven by a consumer culture. iPhones, Androids, most of the capabilities start with being built around enabling consumer activity. At that level, they are not starting with a safety mechanism, and I realize that some organizations say that they are driving security first. They're driving security in a way that enables them to accomplish their consumer culture objectives. They're not aimed at organizational capabilities, and organizations themselves have really struggled with this. So, the whole question of BYOD, which I know is sort of both settled and unsettled at the same time, it's a challenge. We got unexpected technology invasions, we have data speed and aggregation questions, metadata coming together and saying, okay, well, there's a lot of metadata. There's a lot of things you can learn from metadata. There's a lot of detailed things you can learn from metadata, and you all know that. What are you doing with it? Are you protecting it? And the big piece is that technology really does not care who uses it. You have big data, you're aggregating your data, so is somebody else. The same picture that you can, take your iPhone out and you can take a picture of, me, well, who wouldn't? But that same camera can take a picture of things that you really are not supposed to take pictures of and that are criminal activity, and you can say, okay, well, and here's how we're going to, and here's what you have to do. And they can go down this path and make sure that the criminal activity is being done with the same technology as the birthday party is being recorded. Technology is not a value proposition. Technology is value neutral. Again, in a business context, you need to securely enable business and make sure that what we have to keep, we are able to keep. And when IoT intercedes, we need to understand what comes in, what comes out, and what happens if we lose data or capabilities, both of which are important. Who has the access to the information? What happens if they get it? Who wants it? Not only who can get it and who may get it, but who wants it. I know full well that if you lock data down completely, you have a brick. Data has to move. The objective of data is to move. You have no value in it if it's not moving. You just need to be able to understand how you're moving it and where it's going and who can get it. So what do you have to lose? You probably recognize these ones. Data breach through the HVAC system. 40 million cards lost. Cost over $200 million for the remediation for the security side of it, and there's lawsuits still pending. This was really unintended, and it was early in that process. Just a couple weeks ago, $80 million from credential theft. The only reason they didn't lose $850 to $870 million other dollars is because there was a typo and a human intervened, which is an interesting, and I guarantee there's safeguards that are going to be put in place related to this. I mean, I know, people are scrambling. Every time you see one of these things, you can guarantee that there's a million people in the background just scrambling to get this right. But then you look at this and say, that's only fixing the last one. The insider question. Not my favorite, but You know, Robert Hansen in 2001, that's the reason my organization was stood up, right? He had to print things off and deliver them in hard copy to people who were his handlers. 2013, this was an electronic effort. What happens if this is your organization? What if this is your data going? And honestly, it probably is. Can you impose time and access limits, location limits on your data? Do you know what your people can see? Do you know what they're supposed to see? Do you know what kinds of assets you're looking for and you need to protect? You should have a good idea of what your core business is. You should know exactly what it is, that if you lose this, you are out of business, period. This should not be a question to you. Make sure you do it. Also, from the regulatory perspective, if you have PII, like if you can't protect it, don't collect it. There's a lot of hashing that you can do. There's a lot of different ways to get information. You can go back to your original source. You do not have to collect information. You can just get metadata as opposed to real data. It's kind of not as real. The other piece, though, and this is where IoT really weighs in, what about supporting capabilities? Vendor management is a critical capability and a critical question across the board. I know the chip manufacturers are very, very concerned about this, and they're going down the path of how do we do supply chain from beginning to end. A lot of organizations are. Think of it in terms of software, too, by the way. So if your software is, and especially open source, not that you want to control, but you want to understand what the patches are with open source. You want to use open source software that is validated, that is maintained. You don't want some old thing, and you also don't want to pull some random like, ooh, look, this is supposed to be doing this, but it also has this weird little function over here. You know what, that's a bug. Don't use the non-approved functions for things. Find something that really does what it's supposed to do. The good. Industry knows that security is an issue. I've been here, I hear people talking, sometimes I hear people talking, I'm like, oh, you really need to think in security terms. And then I get back and it's like, okay, that's because they were focused this way. Industry, oh, I've got 36 sentences. The threats are multiple, they're coming faster and they're coming stronger. New isn't new, we need to keep moving faster. Government cannot solve these problems, government is being attacked just like you are, and we will always lag. We know that. We are taking a whole of government approach from the FBI's perspective. So NCIFJTF is combining all of the capabilities that all of the government. So when we find something, we work together and make sure that all of government can do this. By the way, and this is the piece that I really want to get to. Hold on. Da-da-da-da-da-da. Prepare, okay? Get to know your local law enforcement agency. It doesn't have to be the FBI. It can be the Secret Service. It can be whoever it is, but get to know somebody. Join InfraGard. Make sure you know what you're going to do if you have a breach. This is today's fire drill. Get your incident response plan. Get it up to your CIOs, to your CEO, to your board. Make sure they understand. Make sure the general counsel knows what to do and when to do it. Make sure you have communication plans in place. This is because your organization will be a victim at some point. Every organization will. Catch early, catch often, because the earlier you catch, the less damage you have. Make sure you understand and report cybercrime. We're trying to get this down to the actual actors instead of keeping this at the high level of like, well, I got it, but I don't want to do it. We're not going to publicize your information. We're going to get it. We're going to treat you like a victim, not victimize you. This is the difference. We want to make sure that you are protected and that your interests are protected in this effort. You make a decision to move, you make a decision to stop, you make the decisions. This is your information. Hygiene, you know, patch, do, make sure, and just start. Thank you for your time.
Great. Thank you, Arlette. Real pleasure. I should take it.
Okay.
No. Great. So that gives you some perspective and hopefully demystifies this agency name and kind of humanizes it.